As you mentioned, some of your best films, in some way it reminds me the ending scene of like
That's interesting too. Okay. That's so funny. I like it. You're right.
said, like,
you're right. Wow, you're pointing out all of the films I probably subconsciously ripped off.
네, 안녕하세요. 최성운의 사고실험입니다. 오늘도 굉장히 특별한 인터뷰를 찾아왔습니다. 올해 칸 영화제 황금종려상을 수상한 아노라'의 션 베이커 감독님을 모시고 인터뷰를 진행했는데요. 2018년에 개봉했던 플로리다 프로젝트라는 영화의 감독으로도 잘 알려져 계신 분입니다. 사실 개인적으로는 굉장히 뜻깊은 인터뷰였는데요. 왜냐하면 제가 뉴스레터에서 살짝 밝힌 적이 있지만 저의 가장 오래된 꿈, 그리고 아직도 간직하고 있는 꿈이 바로 영화를 만드는 것입니다. 그리고 언젠가 영화를 만든다면 닮고 싶은 감독님들이 여럿이 있는데 그 중에 굉장히 많은 지분을 차지하고 계신 분이 바로 또 이 션 베이커 감독님이시기도 해요. 창작자로서 굉장히 많이 배운, 가르침을 얻은 그런 존경하는 분이고요. 이제 황금종려상 대신 칸 영화제라고 하면 약간 좀 어렵고 예술적인 영화들이 많이 수상하는 영화제로 인식하고 계신 분들도 많을 것 같습니다. 2019년에 기생충이 그러했든 이 아노라라는 영화만큼은 또 단언컨대 그렇지 않다고 말씀드릴 수 있습니다. 이제 이 영화의 주인공은 뉴욕의 스트립 클럽에서 이제 성노동을 하는 스트립 댄서입니다만 절대로 그런 소재를 단순히 어떤 자극이나 선정성만을 위해서 소비하진 않았다라고 적어도 저는 느꼈고, 굉장히 대중적으로 소구할 수 있는 재미도 가지고 있으면서 또 영화가 끝나고 나면 굉장히 깊은 질문, 어떤 사회와 인생의 단면을 본 그런 기분을 주면서 긴 여운과 상념을 남기는 그런 훌륭한 영화였다고 말씀드릴 수 있고요. 사실 이번 인터뷰는 좀 난항이 많았습니다. 너무 긴장하기도 했고 감독님이 굉장히 바쁜 스케줄을 소화하고 계셔서 딱 20분만이 인터뷰 시간으로 주어졌습니다. 그리고 무엇보다 당일에 굉장히 좀 멋지게 시선을 맞추고 이렇게 좀 미팅을 할 수 있게 세팅을 해놨었는데 리허설 할 때까지도 괜찮다가 딱 그 방에 입장을 하니까 튕기는 거예요. 근데 시간이 금이니까, 시간이 날아가고 있으니까 그 세팅을 고치고 어떻게 할 여유가 없이 그냥 바로 제 노트북을 가져와서 그냥 이렇게 고개 숙이고 우리가 평소에 이제 미팅하듯이 미팅을 했거든요. 굉장히 보시면 뭔가 급해져 있고 막 말도 좀 많이 더듬고 그런 인터뷰였지만 어쩌면 저는 그런 불완전함 때문에 더 생생하고 아름다운 경험을 했다고 생각을 합니다. 네, 아무튼 제가 굉장히 좋아하고 또 존경하는 감독님과 굉장히 즐겁게 이야기를 나누었으니까요. 또 많은 분들이 이 션 베이커 감독이라는 사람에 대해서 좀 호기심이나 흥미를 가지고 이분의 작품 세계를 한번 탐구해 볼 수 있는 그런 기회가 될 수 있다면 좋겠습니다. 시작하겠습니다.
hi, it's an honor to have you here. Like, I'm someone from Korea, and actually, Anora was wide released in Korea yesterday. And
Yes, I hear it.
And I was just want to tell you this amazing, amazing movie. I really loved it.
Oh, thank you so much.
So I have tons of questions to ask. So let me start with, so your journey as a film director started in New York. You went to NYU to make your next Die Hard, and like your early films set in New York, and then you moved to LA and Orlando, Texas. So how does it feel to make a movie back in New York in 16 years?
Oh, it's great. I always consider myself a New Yorker, even though, I've lived in Los Angeles now for about 14 years, but spent most of my life in New York. And New York is the country's melting pot. It's so alive with different communities and cultures. So I could shoot there forever and never run out of material.
Yeah.
And where I just shot, which was Brighton Beach and Coney Island, this was an area that I wanted to explore. It's culturally rich, it's visually exciting. And I had just shot a fashion film in the area for a small boutique label called Kate. It was almost an homage to Walter Hill's The Warriors, which was shot in Coney Island in 1978. So I think it was shooting that fashion film that re-inspired me to make another New York movie and got me in the Nora headspace.
Yeah, I really like the look in the second act was placed in Coney Island, and yeah, there are some marvelous shots there. So
thank you.
Next, I'm going to ask you about, you've always paid attention to the underrepresented communities, like from Chinese immigrants and takeout and transgender lady and homeless living in motel near Disney World, and of course, sex workers. Yet your characters in your film look so real, like the real neighbors in our daily life. And I wonder, how do you do your research? I mean, of course, you've done a lot of amount of extensive research, but Not only that, I think you actually has entered their communities and became friends with them. So how do you build friendship with them? What's the magic?
Thanks. To tell you the truth, it's really just about time, taking the time, spending the time. In my research process, which is also part of writing, in order to write a good script that's accurate and will speak to the community in the right way, meaning representation, you got to know it. And so you have to immerse yourself, especially if you're from outside of a community that you're focusing on. And my goal is always to make a film that will first and foremost please the community that I'm focusing on. I want them to be happy with the representation. And that just it literally takes time. I have to understand that world. This one Anora had more to do with actually our consulting with sex workers, and understanding the world of, erotic dancers, and less to do with, I didn't do as much research into the Russian American world because, it was already New Yorkers. And plus I had,
Karin Karulian, as your friend.
Yeah, Karin Karulian and others on the film that had those connections to the world already. So they were my passports.
Yeah, and let's move to Anora. In the early parts of Anora, we can see many scenes about Annie working as a sex worker in her club. I think you try hard not to romanticize or victimize her job or herself. So what are the principles that you have in your mind when you're filming her working?
I think it's as simple as just objectively showing it and showing all the different aspects of it, even showing the mundane and showing the menial side of things. Essentially, I wanted the movie to begin as a labor movie. I wanted the audience to think just watching that first 5 minutes before Annie meets Yvonne. I wanted them to think, oh, is Sean giving us another takeout? Is Sean giving us another Prince of Broadway? Perhaps I could have just spent the whole hour and a half with Annie at that club just to show the real ins and outs. But obviously I was planning on having a plot kick in. But my approach was the same. An objective take, something that actually shows details that you could only know from being inside that world. And that's where we got a lot of information from our consultants. And also Mikey and us spending time in that club and really observing. And Mikey herself even shadowed some of the dancers, meaning followed some of the dancers and really got to really observe and understand the mechanics of that world.
Yeah, and one of my favorite shots in this movie is like Annie dozing off in the subway. It's so real. Like we can see her mundaneness and her like hardship and tiredness. Yeah, I can remember that. Let's move to the actor. You've known for like bring some random people or pedestrians in your movies. And I think I actually felt that in the Vegas scene, I noticed that some people watching camera there. And so what is your thought about your approach? And also in Anora, this is the first time that all leading actors are professional actors in your filmography, I guess. So what are the difference this time?
Well, we definitely, because my films are grounded in reality and have sort of a social realist approach, sometimes it really helps in terms of the style to approach certain scenes in a docu style, sort of blurring the line between documentary filmmaking and in fiction narrative filmmaking. And what I mean by that is taking my actors and throwing them into real situations. So yeah, in Vegas, sometimes they were walking the floor, a live floor, meaning we didn't control it. They were walking past real patrons of the casino. So those real patrons might look at the camera and make eye contact with the camera and be like, what's going on? And I love that stuff because even though it might break the fourth wall, it's like, oh, we have people looking at the camera. I think it actually adds to the realism because it is subconsciously to the audience, they're like, oh, this must be real. People are acknowledging a camera's presence. Back to what you talked about with the subway car. The subway car was actually the first shot we shot of the film. And I remember it was kind of, to be quite honest and transparent, we stole that shot, meaning we just took our cameras and Mikey and just at dawn, went on the subway, shot the shot, and got off and just did it. That realism comes across, that spontaneity, that the fact that we're in the real world comes across. And then answering your question regarding the use of seasoned professional actors, yes, because this film was more plot driven and there really wasn't a lot of time to play around. I love working with first-time actors, but I couldn't depend on having to train a new actor. There's a learning curve, obviously. And so in this case, all of my actors had years of experience. You know, Mikey is approaching her 10th year in the industry. She's been on a show called Better Things. And of course, you know her from
Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Yeah, so she comes with 10 years. Most of my cast comes with about 10 years of acting. So that was incredible for me because they brought me so many ideas. They had variations on all of their performances, really understanding the mechanics of filmmaking. So, and I'll give you an example and then we can move on. But like the home invasion scene, it takes place in real time and I can't have any continuity errors. Well, one of the wonderful things about a seasoned professional actor is that they understand that they always have to repeat action to help out the editor. So, you know, if in one take we have an actor putting a glass down to the right, on the second take, they should also put the glass down on the right. You know, when you're working with a first timer, that glass could end up anywhere, you know, and it makes my job much tougher in post-production. And not only that, I think my actors were very focused on motivation and intent. And I was able to spend a lot of time with them, especially Mikey, really talking about the ins and outs of her character, knowing that the audience will never hear her thoughts or know her backstory. You had to feel like this character was lived in and three-dimensional just through her, basically just her in the moment performance. And that took a lot of like discussion and preparation.
As you mentioned, Mikey, like she was stunning. And I've heard that you mentioned that you like the director Lee Chang-dong from Korea.
Yes.
Maybe it's my like misread, but I can refer in some of the relationship between Annie and Igor as relationship between two leading actors of Secret Sunshine, like especially Igor. I would just want to ask, like, what components or what parts of Lee Chang-dong's movie resonate with you?
You know, as you know, I'm a cinephile. I watch a lot and I think I absorb a lot. And sometimes the stuff that I love subconsciously comes through my work. And sometimes I don't even recognize it for years. So you basically just told me that maybe there is a connection with Secret Sunshine. I have to rewatch it. Maybe there is. I'm guilty of that stuff sometimes. You know, these are I love, so they're almost subconscious homages, subconscious, you know, nods. But I think just in general, Chang-dong Lee, for me, he gives. I think they're just basically characters we don't see on the screen often. You know, he's giving love stories to characters that often aren't given love stories by mainstream film and TV.
Yeah.
You know, the fact that he embraced characters who are, you know, some not embraced by society or sometimes have tremendous flaws. But it's okay. It's still treating them with dignity and seeing them as human and three-dimensional. So I think that's the main connection. I don't know if there were any direct, you know, conscious references to any of his work in my film on this one, but again, it could be a subconscious thing.
I just don't mean to like blame you or something. I think
No.
I'm just really glad to see. Yeah. Well, I've been tried my best to avoid spoiler, but I just have to ask about the ending scene, like indirectly. Yeah, it leaves such a profound resonance and makes me to question about the complexity and hardship of people and dignity of human beings. I've heard you've always planned out your ending scenes before you writing your previous scripts, including Florida Project. And how did you approach this?
Well, I like what you said because that's essentially how I designed the ending. I wanted it to be left up for interpretation. So what you just said was really great. Yes, and in this case, it was very early on before I wrote the screenplay, because I always need to at least understand where my characters are going. I need to see I need to know how the story will wrap up. And I also need to know exactly how the last scene will play out, because I consider the ending scenes to be the most important part of cinema storytelling. It's how you'll leave the audience. It's what they will be left with as they are leaving the theater. It's what they'll probably be discussing. Also, I think that films that allow the audience to do some of the thinking and actually do some of the heavy lifting sometimes. I don't want to, again, spoil. I like you. I don't want to spoil the ending right now, but I do want to say that the audience is asked to do a little work, and I think that that's important, and because it engages an audience and it respects an audience. And I know my favorite films are often semi-open-ended endings. They have open-ended endings because life keeps going on. Life keeps going on. Nothing is perfectly tied up with a bow. To tell you the truth, I think that's part of my approach to this entire film, because the Hollywood version of this film would have her living happily ever after. Nobody lives happily ever after. I mean, even if things work out beautifully and you meet your Prince Charming, I'm sure, a couple of weeks down the line, you might have a bad day or two. We're all going to hit obstacles in our lives, and we're all going to hit hardships in our lives. So it's never a perfectly happily ever after. And I think that's how I tackle my endings.
Yeah, as you mentioned, some of your best films, like in some way it reminds me the ending scene of Rosetta by Darden Brothers. Like,
that's interesting too. That's so funny. I haven't thought of them in particular with this movie, but obviously they've had a big impact on my career. They've had a big impact on Prince of Broadway, especially. You can see that. But that's interesting.
Yeah.
I like it. You're right. That when she's went the moped and that noise that's going on, and then it just cuts right out, and it allows you to, though, there's a connection made. That's a wonderful thing about the end of Rosetta, that there is, she's not abandoned. She's not alone, even though it's a very sad ending. There's a hopefulness. There's hope. And wow, you're pointing out all of the films I probably subconsciously ripped off.
Thank you. Because Darden's, their movie always, as you said, life goes on. Yeah, like the kid with a bike and La Promesse and the sun. Okay, we're running out of time, so I think I should keep my questions. So it was in 2000 when you made your debut film, like For Letter Words, and like Mike Lee, you wanted to film your first movie in 25. I know, like, it's been like almost 30 years have passed since you started.
Because I actually, even though the film came out in 2000, it was shot in 1996. So it's almost been 30 years. Yeah.
And I guess those time was not really pleasant or like smooth time, because most of your career you worked as an independent filmmaker, and that job also brings kind of a financial instability and professional instability, insecurity. And I mean, how did you manage to stick with filmmaking with all those years?
I think honestly it was just it was my number one dream. It was really all I considered myself talented at, even though I had to be my own champion for many years, meaning, I have, of course, close loved ones who believed in me, but the industry certainly didn't believe in me. And so I had to it was just perseverance. I knew that my first film was far from perfect. It was made I was very young. I didn't have life experience yet. But something just told me to keep going, because the second one will be better. That's what I always tell young filmmakers. Like, just don't wait. Don't wait. Your first film might not be the perfect film, but it will at least get you started. It'll get you moving. And then you'll want to make a second one and a third one. I didn't make Takeout for 7 years after. Yeah, almost 8. And I learned a lot in that time, and I had actually even changed my whole approach to filmmaking, and even my interests changed in those 7 years. I think I became more interested in the world and not just telling stuff that I knew. I wanted to explore more, and that's where Takeout, I think, came from. So, and during those years, I was lucky enough to be working on a television show on and off. That helped. But also, even when I wasn't on that television show, I did my best. Now, of course, I did have temp jobs here and there and some office jobs here and there. But for the most part, I tried to stay within the industry, even if it was on the far fringe of the industry. And I'm talking like, editing corporate videos and wedding videos and stuff like that, stuff that would just keep me at least practicing my craft. Even though I was editing a wedding video, it still had me editing. It still had me on the keyboard using the same programs that people would use to make a feature film, and it just kept me fresh and understanding. And then, of course, I never stopped watching films. I always kept up on what was new and what was different. And I think that's what I discovered Dogma 95, and that's what really got me into Takeout. So it was really just about retaining my interest, not giving up, having faith in myself. And I didn't really realize this till years later. Somebody told me this years later, maybe even after my fourth film, but they said, cream rises. So it might take years and years, but people will eventually recognize this. And I just had to have faith that I was building a filmography that would eventually get full recognition. And my God, it took me so many years. It took me until Florida Project, until people started looking back at my older films. And that's why I've been able to have Criterion release Takeout. And now they're releasing Prince of Broadway and Starlet eventually. So yeah. So it's been really wonderful to have a renewed interest in my previous work and it being taken just as seriously. Not a lot of people knew these films existed. So it took the newer films to shed light on the older ones.
Okay, I think I should wrap up here, but thank you so much for I mean, before we finish this, I just want to tell you that you've been my best mentor, as a creator. Really, I mean it, because I've learned how a creator should perceive the world and the rest of the world and people in the daily life, in the neighbor. Your warmth and sense of humor. I mean, I really want to resemble that. And one day when I make a movie sometime, I will make a movie sometime. And, I want to resemble yours, even just for a little. Yeah, so thank you for everything you taught.
So sweet. And good luck with everything. And I love your attitude because you just said, I will. And it's all about perseverance. And you will. You just have to say you will. And eventually you'll get there. That's so nice. And I just have to say in general to the Korean audiences who might be watching this, Korea has been so embracing of my films. The love that I got from the Florida Project, I've never experienced anything like that. I really hope to come back soon and be able to, and say hi because it was really a wonderful experience. And I hope that Anora, has the same impact there.
Yeah, thank you for your time and hope to see you in Korea soon. Yeah.
Thank you.
So, thank you.
무슨 감정인가요?
그냥 근데 그 말이 진짜 하고 싶었거든요. 되게 고맙다고, 진짜 되게 많이 배웠다고. 왜냐면 이 사람 영화가 진짜 항상 뭔가 좀 변두리에 있는 사람들을 다루는데 그걸 되게 막 예술적으로 찍는 것도 아니고 막 엄청 착취적으로 찍는 것도 아니고 막 진짜 그냥 사람으로 찍거든요. 그래서 되게 못난데 막 사랑스럽고 웃기고 막 그렇단 말이에요. 근데 저 진짜 많이 배웠어요. 그런 거를 그냥 사람을 도구로 보는 거 말고 사람으로 보는 거, 카메라 뒤에서. 그래서 그냥 진짜 말하고 싶었거든요. 당신이 내 스승이었다고. 언젠가 나도 영화 만들면 당신 같은, 당신 영화를 좀 닮은 그런 영화 찍고 싶다고 그렇게 말했는데 그냥 너 그렇게 찍으면 된다고 해가지고 그게
진짜 좋았어요.